This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I am your host here today with my co-host, Kate B. Welcome to the Meetinghouse, Kate.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
This is not her first time. I think the first time you were coming to us from Italy. Is that right?
Gosh, yeah, that seems like forever ago. A lot has happened since then.
It's a pandemic ago, wasn't it? She got trapped over there in Italy and talked to us from her perch over there in outside of Florence.
San Miniato.
San Miniato. But she's here with me today in the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina. It's a gorgeous day here. We've been out and about already today. And we're going to read the news and share the news and talk about it, the news and religion in America, as you've come to expect. At the end of the show, I have a commentary entitled, "The Church We Need." I posted this up on Facebook and got some very interesting feedback, and I'm going to report on all of that a little later in the show. I'm going to talk to you about a book that I published a number of years ago in my travels over the next couple of weeks. But as always, we start out with the news. 5 news stories today, and I'm just always encouraged by the people who read the news and listen to the news. This is brought to you by Perfecto Coffee, Inc. This is a company out of California, and I've reported on this many times. They were students of mine at Georgetown College and moved out to California. He's a veteran of the U.S. Marines and opened up their own company about the time that we launched the Meetinghouse, the video version of the Meetinghouse. And they sell coffee. We always send a package of coffee to all of our guests. Okay, I guess I'll have to send a package home with you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, please. You're a big coffee drinker. You can visit their website at perfectocoffeeinc.com and order your own. Or if you're going to be a guest on my show, you can wait for it. First, the news. We're going to start in Phoenix, Arizona today. Pastor Mark Driscoll, a familiar name to those of you who follow the religion news, now of Trinity Church in Scottsdale, Arizona, is again the center of controversy. You'll remember that Driscoll, kind of a nationally known white evangelical preacher on the West Coast, pastor of the famous Mars Hill Church in Seattle. He resigned in 2014 following the release of an internal investigation related to his behavior as pastor. Following the resignation, the Mars Hill Church dissolved. And now, 39 former elders of that congregation have released a letter calling for Driscoll to resign from his current church, Trinity Church, and to seek reconciliation with those he has hurt, especially in the Mars Hill network. Some of you have listened to the podcast entitled "The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill," put out by Christianity Today. All of this comes in the wake of similar accusations toward Driscoll arising from members and ministers at the Trinity Church in Phoenix. There ought to be some way we could discipline these kind of ministers and keep them out of the pool.
Sounds like a cautionary tale.
There's a lot of these kind of cautionary tales. Mark Driscoll was a very influential, kind of an aggressive, skinny jeans type megachurch preacher out there on the West Coast, in part of the New Reformed movement, a Baptistic congregation tied in with actually Al Mohler and the whole Reformed movement. But then he had this leadership style that was rude and crude and socially unacceptable.
It's following him around. Wherever you go, there you are.
we'll see if this report can put pressure on the congregation down there to push him out. And it is a cautionary tale, as you say, for other people who need to pastor a little more humility.
All right. Coming out of Charlotte, this is Charlotte, North Carolina. Jonathan Lotz, grandson of Billy Graham, has been hospitalized for treatment of COVID-19. His mother, Anne Graham Lotz, announced that her son, now 50 years old, is in an unnamed hospital in the ICU unit. She reported that he is not on a ventilator. We do not know whether or not he had been vaccinated. Lotz, like his mother and grandfather, leads a Christian ministry known as the Jonathan Lotz Ministries. He recovered from cancer a number of years ago. No word yet on how or when he was exposed to the virus. The family asks for prayers.
You know, Charlotte is just down the road from us here, a 2-hour drive. It's the epicenter of a lot of Christian ministries. I reported on some of them, including headquarters of a very prominent Pentecostal minister. But I'm just curious about this whole report. They did tell us how he was exposed to it. As far as we know today, I haven't heard any of the news just this morning, whether he's been on a ventilator, but they didn't say whether he'd been vaccinated.
Well, and that's the big question these days, isn't it? Whether or not someone is vaccinated.
All over the country, especially with these white evangelical people and Pentecostal. I've got a story a little later this morning about a preacher who says he's going to kick you out of the church if you wear a mask to church. I don't understand this.
No, it confounds science, certainly. And although there are personal reasons why someone may choose not to get the vaccination. I myself had some internal back and forth regarding it, but finally have gotten the vaccination because it's the right thing to do, I think, for the community and because I want to travel. Of course, having been in Italy and wanting to go back, a lot of the European countries are requiring vaccination passports. I don't know that there's any way to tell where he may have gotten it or the exposure. And that's part of the issue, especially now with the mask mandate being inconsistent across territories and counties and states and everything. You got to do what you need to do to protect yourself.
Kate, you are a corporate trainer and coach. You may run into this as a requirement for the corporations that you work in at some point. Many of the big corporations are going to require their employees or probably their vendors to be vaccinated.
Well, I think that there's still a lot of unknowns. Companies, I'm sure, are wrestling with this internally, both the legality of it and the protocols that they need to put into place to protect themselves, liability, to protect productivity, and these sorts of things. I am heading out to Denver in September to lead a training and was frankly quite surprised. I have expected the company to say we're going to do this virtual, but a lot of the bigger companies want to bring people back together and people want to be back together.
They do. Ball games, performances, churches, businesses, the Dairy Queen, everybody wants to get out and mix it up, but nobody wants to be the cause of another outbreak, and it's going to be a real tension point in the courts to try to balance. On the one hand, there's a lot of resistance to governments mandating what citizens do, like wear masks. So when governors and mayors do things, there's a lot of pushback. But the question, can a corporation set health guidelines for its employees and for its vendors and customers?
Of course, one of the issues with that, you talk about these things being litigated in the courts, is the expediency of it, right? These are policies that need to be set now in order to contain the virus and hopefully navigate our way through the pandemic. And, legal battles are not expedient. And if it takes 2 years to litigate it, in 2 years, it may be a moot point. it's a difficult time. It's a tricky time, and I think most people are trying to do the best they can and make decisions that are wisest for themselves and their business, their community, I hope.
Well, let's hope Jonathan Lotz is okay, that he's treated well and can be released. They've asked for prayers, and we certainly should lift him up in prayer. From Dallas, Texas, this is a better story. Catholic bishops in El Paso and Dallas, in Texas, have asked the Texas Governor Greg Abbott to halt an order that could result in shutting down Catholic facilities in Texas that care for foster and migrant children. This is another place where churches and government authorities are at odds with one another. In the letter they wrote to the governor, they write, quote, "Motivated by our faith, Catholic Charities provides food, clothing, and shelter to these children, following Jesus' command to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to welcome the stranger and to care for those who suffer. But this work is now in peril," end quote. A recent state-level executive order will soon strip the child care licenses from any organization that provides shelter to migrant children, including the 6 child welfare programs operated by Catholic Charities in Texas. The governor's order was designed to prevent housing and feeding of those who come into the country illegally, but Christian groups like the Catholics and others normally do not distinguish those who come legally and those who come illegally. They're all just people who need help. This is such a tricky thing. And it's the opposite of where the Catholics were. In Philadelphia at the Supreme Court, the Catholics wanted to discriminate between gay and non-gay parents who came to adopt. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court and received permission from the Supreme Court to discriminate in that way. But here they don't want to discriminate, legal and illegal. The governor wants them to. And this is going to be a really tough, there are a lot of Catholics in Texas. It's a very religious state. I'm sure that the Catholics are not the only ministries out there doing this. That is just trying to help anybody, regardless of whether they're legal or illegal.
Well, the need is so great. And there, of course, has been an influx since the end of the Trump presidency of people crossing the border. And I think any effort to mitigate the human suffering, we're in such a time of great human suffering. I think any endeavor to ease that and to assuage it is so valuable, and is a calling, I think, based in the Bible and based in the Christian faith. So I hate to see these types of legal battles when it comes to easing suffering.
Well, in my commentary at the end of the show today, I'm going to talk about this under the rubric of the church we need. I talk about gospel work, and the number one, I think, the gospel work needed today is hospitality. And hospitality not just to racial groups and gender groups, but to refugee groups. So I do bring that up a little later in the show, because I'm like you. I think in our world today, hospitality is the number one Christian practice that is needed.
We have so many things dividing, legal versus illegal, gay versus straight, vaccinated now versus unvaccinated, all of these things dividing us. And it would just be great to see more effort and endeavor put into, okay, what's bringing us together? And that's our humanity. We are in such a time of transition and up-leveling as a human species, fighting last century issues and problems.
Last millennium.
Yeah,
you were born in the last millennium, as was I. And hospitality is one way. I hadn't thought about hospitality applying to the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, because my tendency is to say, you're not vaccinated, you're not welcome here. But I guess the hospitality rule trumps that, doesn't it?
Yeah, which makes it a hard line to follow sometimes.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Challenge is what I want to do. It's more difficult to be a Christian than we think, you know.
All
And
right.
from Bethesda, tell us
From
about it.
Bethesda, the nation's top medical scientists spoke candidly about the COVID pandemic in an interview with the Baptist Press Global. Give God the glory, but roll up your sleeves, said Francis Collins, an evangelical Christian who heads the National Institute of Health in Bethesda. Collins previously headed the National Human Genome Research Institute and is credited with discovering the genes associated with a number of diseases. It also gets to another dividing subject in Christianity. He is perplexed by people of faith who are unwilling to do their part to put an end to COVID-19 by being vaccinated. A lot of science went into this, but a lot of prayer too. It does feel like those prayers were answered, he said. This feels like a gift from God, but you do have to unwrap the gift.
You know, I read his book many years ago. I forget the name of it, where he talked about his conversion. He was a 27-year-old medical student in North Carolina, at Duke, I think. And a nurse, a black woman who was a nurse, talked to him about her faith. She I'm sure, had no notion that he would become one of the most important people in the country and one of the most important Christian spokespersons in the country. And I think they won the Nobel Prize a few years ago for the genome work. He's liable to win it again because of all of this. The top medical authority in the country kind of blending his religion and his profession.
Yeah, I'd be curious to have a conversation with him around the genome research. A lot of Christians, conservative Christians, having trouble around the idea of using stem cells and embryos for science research. I myself am in favor of it. I think there's so much we have discovered that can ease the disease, many of the diseases we deal with today.
And then Nashville gives us the other side of this spectrum of, quote, Christian leaders. Pastor Greg Locke, who I've reported on before, continues his campaign against public health protocols, state and national governments, and the very idea of a virus. Quote, don't believe this Delta variant nonsense, end quote, he said to his congregation, the Global Vision Bible Church just east of Nashville, Tennessee. The commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Health, though, reported that the state is averaging more than 700 new cases of COVID per day throughout the month of July. Reverend Locke, though, has promised to remove from the sanctuary anybody who wears a mask. Quote, if you start showing up with all those masks and all this nonsense, I'll ask you to leave, end quote. He has reported that church attendance has increased significantly since his stand against health protocols has been made public.
Now that's just
crazy.
Mind-boggling. If the whole point is sovereignty, an individual freedom to decide whether or not to wear a mask and who should or should not be mandating, if someone wants to voluntarily wear a mask into his sanctuary, for them, he then is playing the role of government.
He is. He's on the opposite end of that. He needs to provide, to practice hospitality in his congregation for those people who are vaccinated and wearing a mask.
Of course, people vote with their feet and they are leaving the church.
That is true.
And this is true.
This is one of the reasons here.
Yeah, people vote with their feet. And I think people want to feel safe in the places that they go and will do what they need to do to protect themselves. And if they feel like a church, a store, a business is getting in the way of that, then they'll go somewhere else.
I posted on Facebook, I'm going to talk about this in just a minute, the question, what kind of church does America need? I got all kinds of answers. I'm going to go through that in a minute as kind of a prelude to my own commentary on it. But that's all the news from the Meetinghouse this week, brought to you by Perfecto Coffee Inc. They're our partners in this good work we're trying to do. Thanks to my daughter, Kate B., for helping me with the news today. She's been here taking care of me. I had surgery yesterday. Can you tell? It was outpatient, but it still hurt.
Yeah, you were a little pathetic yesterday.
I was really pathetic yesterday. I hardly got any sleep last night. But you know, I have to confess, and Sarah Kate already knows this, every episode of my life reminds me of a John Prine song. Now, I know, see, that's her reaction anytime I mention John Prine. She's tired of all the Prineness of things. But I'm not going to assume you, our viewers and listeners, are. I'm going to play a John Prine song, but here's my explanation. Last week, we tried to play a new video by the British rock band Iron Maiden. Now, I don't normally listen to Iron Maiden.
No, he doesn't.
How about that? But the whole video, the whole song, 7-minute song, was about 2 biblical images. It was just, the whole thing was biblical references on it, and I thought this was significant. It's a 7-minute song, but 46 seconds into the video, Facebook cut us off because they have rules about us playing copyright versions of the song. We knew they might do this, but we did it anyway to see if they would. We were only going to play about a minute of it, but we didn't even get to 60 seconds. But fortunately, YouTube did not cut us off. We broadcast through YouTube as well, through the church website, St. Stephen's Baptist Church YouTube, and also through the Meetinghouse.net YouTube channel. We broadcast this live. So we switched our broadcast from Facebook Live, or actually we took our YouTube channel and just broadcasted on Facebook. But we lost some listeners, I was told this morning, in the process. But this song we're going to play today, Don't Bury Me in the Cold, Cold Ground, is a stage recording. It's not a studio recording. It's not a CD. This is from somebody who attended a concert in 2016. We don't think it has the same restrictions, but we're going to find out in just a minute. John Prine, who died last year, April the 7th, of COVID.
Which is about the time that you discovered him.
Which is, well, I discovered him. How do you discover, it's like discovering the Rock of Gibraltar, I had never heard of him until June the 12th, when a friend of mine put up a memorial video and encouraged everybody to watch it. And when my friends post things, I read it. Yeah. When you post things, I read it, Kate. And I learn things that way. I buy books because of it. I learn, and I listen to CDs. So I discovered John Prine. I've done 2 or 3 shows on him. I've played a lot of his music, on this show. And in this story, he tells the lyrics, and they start out this way. I got up this morning, put on my slippers, walked in the kitchen, and died. He goes to heaven, and there the angels explain to him what happened and what he said. Well, and we're going to play it in just a minute, and motivated in part by my illness yesterday.
Well, I'm glad you're on the mend. And everything is fine. It's got taken care of, and you bounced back. So
I'm glad you were here to help take care of me and go to the hospital with me and take care of me. Thanks to Gail Coulter and her daughter Julie, who brought dinner last night. That was nice.
Delicious.
It was delicious. And a shout out to Gail and Julie. So thanks for being here today, Kate. You'll be gone when we come back from the video. Yep. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Sounds great. I enjoyed being here, always.
All right, let's take a listen to John Prine. Please don't bury me in the cold, cold ground.
Just a suggestion. My doctor told me don't you go leaving any of your parts to anybody, so you're not doing anybody any good. Woke up this morning with all my slippers. I walked in the kitchen and died. Yeah, oh, what a feeling. My soul went through the ceiling, and I hung up into heaven. I did right. When I got there, they did say, Johnny, heaven is the way. You slipped upon the floor and hit your head. And all the angels say, just before you passed away, these were the very last words that you said. Please don't bury me down in the cold, cold ground. I'd rather have them cut me up and pass me all around. So my brain in a hurricane, but I could have my eyes and the depth to take. Both of my ears, they don't find the size. Stomach to Milwaukee if they run out of beer. Put my socks in a cedar box, just get them out of here. A penis tomato could have my arms, look out, I got your nose. I saw my heart to the junk man, give my love to Rose. But please don't bury me down in the cold, cold ground. I'd rather have them cut me up and pass me all around. So my brain in a hurricane, the blind can have my eyes, and the deaf can take both of my ears if they don't find the size. To the footloose, careless, fancy free. Give my knees to the needy, don't pull that stuff on me. Hand me down my walking cane, it's a sin to tell a lie. Send my mouth way down south, kiss my ass goodbye. Don't bury me down in the cold, cold ground. I'd rather have them cut me up, pass me all around. So my brain in a hurricane, but I can have my eyes, and the deaf can take both of my ears, they don't mind the size.
Please don't bury me down in the cold, cold ground. Wonderful song. And even if it was a personal and private recording at a public concert, it's wonderful, humorous, and with a lot of truth in it as well. You're listening to The Meetinghouse. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody, coming to you over Rejoice Radio in the Golden Isles of Georgia and through the television network of the St. Stephen's Baptist Church of Louisville, Kentucky. Or you may be listening to this at some later date through the podcast on our podcast page at themeetinghouse.net/podcast. It will be up later today for you to listen in your car or something like that. That was John Prine, the late, great John Prine. I regret that I never had heard of him, let alone heard him or attended a concert, but I'm trying to make up for that. That video was brought to mind as I've struggled through some health issues myself over the last several weeks. This coming Sunday, I'll be preaching at the Providence Baptist Church in Hendersonville, North Carolina. This past Sunday, that church celebrated its 20th anniversary. And among the events was a concert by Kate Campbell, who was my guest in the Meetinghouse several months ago, talking about John Prine. She performed with John Prine and sang with John Prine. I think he sang on one of her CDs. And I want to congratulate the founding pastor, Gail Coulter, she was the one who brought us dinner last night. She's still an active member of the congregation. And you brought dinner to our home last night following my surgery. You're the best. It's great to minister with you, do the gospel work there at Providence Baptist Church. And I look forward to preaching there this coming Sunday. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. The following Sunday, I will be at Third Baptist Church of Owensboro, Kentucky. It's celebrating 125 years. And I was the pastor there back in the 90s, 1996 to be exact, when they celebrated 100 years. I was only pastor there for 6 years, from 1991 to 1997, but I wrote a book about it. Heaven for a Dime. I have it right here. Heaven for a Dime. I'm going to see if I can get some of these and bring them with me to Owensboro to sell a few. I took the title from a letter I received. Toward the end of my ministry there, I think, I received an anonymous letter from South Bend, Indiana. So that's where it was postmarked. It was written on one of those half sheets that you would tear off of a pad that you used to buy in a 5 and dime store. I guess you buy them in Walmart now. And this is what that letter to me read.
For those listening to us, we're having a small technical difficulty right now. If you could bear with us just one moment.
This is Dwight Moody in the Meetinghouse. I think we had a little technical problem there. I think what happened is I accidentally turned off my microphone. And so I'm going to read this letter to you again. I was telling you that I got a letter. The picture of the letter's on the front page of the book, Heaven for a Dime. And this is what the letter said. Many years ago, I found a dime in an envelope in a Sunday school room and spent it. Brother Sam Martin was pastor, and Mrs. Givens was Sunday school teacher. Didn't want to miss heaven for a dime. God bless, end quote. And attached to that sheet, taped across the top of that half sheet of cheap stationery paper, was one dime. I kept the letter, used it as the title of the book. I should have kept the dime. I don't think I did. But we know when the pastor was, the person had to have been almost 90 years old when they wrote the letter, if they'd been a 10-year-old kid at the church. And what had struck me about it, and the reason I used it as the title of the book, besides the fact that it's such a wonderful phrase, heaven for a dime, is that it means that this had been on somebody's conscience for a lifetime. and that's a sad commentary. I self-published this book in 2002 through iUniverse through their Writers Showcase imprint. It's still available. Stories, There is, I'll be back in just a minute. I hope we've solved our technical problems. This is the Meetinghouse. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody. I have a commentary today, but I want to give some prelude to it. I posted a question on Facebook a few days ago entitled, "What kind of church does America need?" It was shared a couple of times and quickly garnered 46 comments. That's not viral by any means, but it's a good return on my post. Some people were offended by my inclusion of the word America, as if I were proposing some version of Christian America. They obviously don't read much of what I write. Other people use words trying to describe the church that they want to be a part of. Words like empathy, open-hearted, loving, honest, mystical, faithful, egalitarian, diverse, curious, focused on the well-being of our neighbors, caring for the least of these. Well, I like all of those words. Several people said some version of this, a church that is focused on Jesus and his teaching, and certainly I agree with that. One person wrote this: "This is a great question and has me pondering." Another wrote, "This is the big question, isn't it?" Another said, "Boy, that is a question freighted with some big assumptions." I'm not quite sure what they meant. It sparked some serious thought from a friend of mine named Gary Furr and also Steve Shoemaker. And today, Russell Moore, not that he had read my column, I'm sure, but he distributed a commentary entitled Gospel Sanity, which is very close to what I call gospel clarity, which I'll describe in just a minute. More than one person said we need fewer churches, and a few more said we need many different kinds of churches. Of course, I'm not talking about a congregation or an individual church, but I'm talking about the Christian community. What does the Christian community in the United States need to look like, need to engage in, need to be in order to serve the people of this country? Chris Barnes was one person who gave this answer. What kind of church do we need? A vaccinated church. Well, of course, you know that resonated with me. What do you think? You can still post on that, or you can write me. You can respond to the newsletter version of this, as some people already have. You can post on Facebook. Tell me what you think. What kind of church do you need? What kind of church does America need right now? These are turbulent times. I'll be back in just a minute. Let's take now a planned break, and I'll give you my thoughts on it. I will be preaching on this theme for the next 2 Sundays at the 2 churches I mentioned above that are celebrating anniversaries, one 20 years and one 125 years. Let's take a break. I'll be back. These are strange times for religion in America. And it's not just because of the pandemic and all of its attendant social, legal, organizational, and spiritual challenges. Looking around the landscape of Christianity, I see these things. I'm sure you see them. Pentecostals fixated on prophecies about Trump as president and, of course, the end of the world. Evangelicals watching bellwether congregations struggle with racial reconciliation. I reported on that last week. The McLean Bible Church outside of D.C. and the Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis. Catholics pushing back against Democrats. I spoke about this just a minute ago in Philadelphia. Democrats that want to limit who can adopt children, and they're pushing back against the Republicans in Texas that want to limit which immigrants can be served by Christian people. Christians everywhere are witnessing a rapid decline in affiliated members, and the two largest denominations in America, the United Methodist and Southern Baptist, are navigating severe internal conflicts. I've reported a lot on both of those. I was at the recent Southern Baptist Convention. Who knows what kind of church, what version of Christianity, what sort of beloved community will survive and thrive in the years ahead? I know this. I want to be part of a community blessed with gospel clarity. A pastor from Tulsa called me with this question, not knowing it is the question that has been circulating in my mind for weeks. When I was growing up, people were sure the gospel dealt with primarily with personal evangelism and world evangelization. The four spiritual laws, you remember, and the hour of decision. Churches and organizations that focused on these things, Campus Crusade, for instance, was at the forefront of this version of the gospel. So was my dad, and most of the churches in which I was formed as a believer. I don't ever remember an invitation inviting Christian people to get involved in social justice or march for the rights of people or to be involved in integration issues. But always there was the invitation to become a Christian, to trust Jesus and be baptized. But Martin Luther King Jr. and his ecumenical cohort of gospelers turned the tide with his global movement, bringing social justice and corporate righteousness to the fore. And today, much of the passion that's coming out of millennial Christians and generations Y and Z is directed toward this goal of social justice, global justice, universal justice, climate justice. I've been searching for just the right biblical text to encapsulate my convictions on this matter of gospel clarity. I like the words of Jesus, quote, "The kingdom of God is at hand." I embrace the summary of Simon Peter, spoken on the day of Pentecost, quote, "Evil men killed Jesus, but God raised him from the dead." I resonate with the vision of Paul the Apostle, quote, "In Christ, God was reconciling the world." And I love the threefold declaration of the great Hebrew prophet Micah: do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. But when all is said and done, it's the inside of John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, that still resonates with me. God loved the world so much that God gave the one and only Son, Jesus. That's my summary of the gospel. It's about God and Jesus. It's about all of us being the world. It's about love. It's about generosity. It's about the pouring out of God's heart into the world. It gathers up so much of what I think the gospel is about. Out of our gospel clarity flows our gospel work. The litany of godly work that needs to direct the energies and resources of Christian people is long and varied, providing food and shelter, caring for the sick and suffering, ensuring life and health for those who are conceived, combating climate change, promoting economic and legal justice, addressing wealth disparities, and certainly collaborating for the public health worldwide. And then there's hospitality. Kate and I got to talking about that earlier on the show. It is, as I said then, and I'll say again, the first and foremost of all the Christian practices needed in the world today. Too often the sign reads, "No room in the inn for you." But more often the sign needs to quote Jesus, "Come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, who are lonely and alone, who are weak and in danger, who are sick unto death, who are refugees from many of the world's danger zones, who are praying, deliver us from evil, who are seeking life and hope and a community of peace, who are wearing a mask or not wearing a mask," as Kate pointed out earlier. The world is awash with wave after wave of people seeking a promised land. And Christians are called to welcome them in the name of Jesus. Many of the people seeking a promised land are Christians themselves. A few years ago, Pope Francis stood on his small 6th-floor balcony and called upon every Catholic parish in Europe to provide hospitality to at least one family fleeing death and destruction in the Middle East. There are 120,000 parishes in Europe. I think that's a terrific call for every congregation in the United States. Catholic, Protestant, Pentecostal, Evangelical, Orthodox, every synagogue, every mosque. Let's all provide hospitality to people. Hospitality can be the good gospel work of every congregation in the world. What a difference it would make. What a difference it would make in our political climate. It would challenge a lot of us. The liberal churches would have to welcome conservatives and vice versa. The vaccinated churches would have to welcome the unvaccinated. The Democrats have to welcome the Republicans. It's a real challenge. It's not as easy as it sounds. But all this brings me to gospel hope. We all need gospel hope, especially when voices are demanding that we put our faith in a country, even the United States, or democracy, or some other form of government, or capitalism, or some other economic system, or any number of the would-be saviors, political or otherwise. But there is only one Savior, only one hope, only one future that grips me deep down in my soul. Isaiah described it as, quote, the year of the Lord's favor, end quote. Paul envisioned it as, quote, a plan for the fullness of time to gather up all things in Christ, things in heaven and things on earth. And the John I alluded to a minute ago, in exile, saw, quote, a new heaven and a new earth, with the river of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God, end quote. I like that vision. This is God's future. We catch a glimpse of it in the life, death, and ministry, teaching, healing, miracle working, and the resurrection of Jesus. That is my hope. I hope it's your hope. That's my gospel clarity that calls us to gospel work toward a gospel hope. That's the kind of church we need today. That's the kind of church I try to form with my preaching. It's the kind of church I want to be a member of. I'm going to be talking more about this in my sermons, and I'll publish the sermon in my newsletter next week. If you'd like to subscribe to the newsletter, you can go to our website at themeetinghouse.net. I'll have more to say about that in just a minute. I am Dwight A. Moody in the Meeting House, and I'll be back in just a minute. You're in the Meeting House with me, your host, Dr. Dwight A. Moody. A little earlier in the show, I was assisted by Kate B. as my co-host. She's been a frequent visitor and host on the Meeting House. Most of you know that she is my daughter, and she is an entrepreneur herself as a coach and consultant at the corporate and the personal level. Kate B. Every week I publish a newsletter on Wednesday night. It goes out at 8:30 on Wednesday night, and even after I had surgery yesterday, I came home and finished my newsletter and sent it out right at 8:30. I was working on it almost until the last minute. I sent it to my proofreaders at about 7:45, and shout out to David Hodges, who got back to me really quick with a whole series of corrections. But you can read it each week. You can subscribe to this free newsletter. It does contain all of my commentaries, all of the news. It leads you to the website, and on the website there's, my podcast galore, all of the news going back, for several years. And on a host of things that I have commented on over the years that I have been doing this. A number of years ago, I published a book of these commentaries called On the Other Side of Oddville. I do have copies of this book. It's out of print. If you would like a copy, I'll be glad to send you one. You can order one through the website. I'll be taking them with me to Owensboro, and maybe we'll set up a table there. I'm hoping my son Ike Moody will be with me in Owensboro. I think he is completing a drawing of the church, a kind of a centennial drawing that he will sell prints to. And if he does, I hope you buy his print rather than my book. You can read all of these commentaries. And here's something else you can do on the website. You can join our Circle of 70. This reflects my ambition to identify and secure 70 donors for the Meeting House. These are people that believe in what we're doing right here in the Meeting House. We're trying to sustain civil conversation about one of the most explosive issues in American society right now, and that is religion. Religion in private life, religion in public life. There's so many stories and legal cases and political campaigns that turn on religious issues or issues that have a religious component. And I try to report on these, and we have both conservative and liberal guests on this show. I had a conservative guest here not too long ago, and it really upset some of my liberal listeners. One of them wrote and said, I had to turn it off. Well, I'm trying to listen to people and trying to understand people right here in the Meeting House. You can support this. We're looking for 70 donors. We now have 28. You can be one of them. It's at 42. We need 42. Our board, we have a 5-member board. We are chartered in the Commonwealth of Kentucky as a 501c3. We have an IRS letter as a charity, which means your gifts are tax deductible. And we're trying to raise $24,000 between now and the end of the year to fund our work here and to expand it. I really want to employ a contract with a marketing person to help. Well, we continue to have technical problems, and I think it's on my end here with my equipment. What I really need is an engineer in my studio with me right now, right here. Maybe that's what we should do with some of the money, is to pay a person to be right here in my studio in North Carolina. I have a fabulous engineer down in Kentucky, over in Kentucky on the other side of the mountains, and she's managed to navigate all of this week, but I'm sure the problem is coming from my equipment, and I need a young engineer. Maybe if we can raise our $24,000 that I've appealed to, we can solicit the kind of help we need right here. I certainly hope so. I do want to thank you for listening today. I want to thank you for becoming a member of the Circle of 70. You know, I named it for 70 because last year when I launched it, I had just turned 70 years old. And well, you see, Alex is trying to take care of me there, turning on the music when we lose the signal. I want to thank her. Everett Armstrong is down in the Golden Isles of Georgia, as I was saying, Brunswick, St. Simons, Sea Island, Jekyll Island, down in that area where I have a home. And Alex Mattingly, working out of her Lexington home for the Louisville network at St. Stephen's Baptist Church. Thank you all for sticking with us today. I hope you caught enough to keep your interest. You can follow me on Twitter at Dwight A. Moody. I'm up to 420 followers on Twitter. We're taking Twitter world by storm, aren't we? Next week, my guest is the author of a new biography of C.S. Lewis. Many of you know that I'm an avid reader of C.S. Lewis, and I've just discovered this week that the #1 bookstore in the world for old, rare first editions of C.S. Lewis and all the Inklings is right here in North Carolina, Western North Carolina, Hendersonville, North Carolina. I visited the store this past week. One of their staff is a member of our church, and she put me on to it. And I'm going to go back and talk to them. But next week, Hal Poe, who teaches at Union University down in Tennessee, is our guest next week. He's just published volume 2 of his 3-volume biography of C.S. Lewis. And he's going to be my guest next week. He's going to be actually in the Wade Center for C.S. Lewis Studies up in Wheaton College. That's where he'll be talking to me from. I hope you'll join us next week. Until then, get a vaccine, be safe, smile, listen to people, drink some coffee, order some Perfecto Coffee Inc. Coffee, send a donation, join our Circle of 70. We need your help. And more than that, pray for the soul of America. I'm in the Meetinghouse. I'm Dwight Moody. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meetinghouse with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion and American life.